Well, I'm honored to be here, and it's wonderful to see the richness of activity in your Sangha. It's very beautiful, and also the physical movement. You could kind of feel a certain energy here during the sit that is a compilation of all of you, and maybe some of that. So excellent. So I'm here to share a bit about Sila, about ethics, and mindful of the time, I want to leave some time for conversation. So I'm gonna maybe compress a little bit about what I got to share. But let's see how it goes. So sila, ethics, it's indispensable on the path. We may focus on concentration and mindfulness on this journey to nibbana, but if we don't have sila right, then it doesn't work. And in the numerical discourses, the Buddha said, when a person has developed wholesome virtue, there is no need for an act of will. May I attain nibbana. It is natural that a person who has developed wholesome virtue will attain nibbana. So he's saying that in and of itself takes us forward. So it's a launch pad. On the other hand, he was clear that without ethics, it doesn't work. And the numerical discourses 8.29, he said, just as Visakha, whatever is accomplished by an unvirtuous person is completely unproductive. I say the same regarding Nibbana. Whatever is accomplished by an unvirtuous person does not lead to Nibbana. So this is of utmost importance. It needs to be emphasized. And, I've been on this journey for many decades because I'm old and everything. And I've seen teachers with significant realization kind of crash and burn over the decades. Big problems have arisen. So I know there's pain arises from these situations. So it's become real clear how essential ethics are. And I want to explore the five precepts: training and not killing, training and not stealing, training and not lying, training avoiding sexual misconduct, and training and avoiding substances that cloud the mind. But before that, I want to kind of back up a little bit and explore a little bit about some underlying principles, because the issue is how poor ethics cloud the mind, they darken the mind, while positive ethics bring brightness. There's a famous quote by the Buddha that I really love in the numerical discourses: the mind is luminous, obscured by visiting defilements. That's right there. Here's the path. The mind is luminous, obscured by visiting defilements. And therefore, visiting defilements are a core problem, which keep us from recognizing the luminous nature of mind. And these are tied to ethics, actions of body, speech, and mind so often. Also, karma, traumas, all that stuff, but ethics and our actions, certainly. The question is a little bit like throwing a bucket of roofing nails in the path of a Ferrari. This is a car that can travel smoothly at extremely high speeds, but with a bunch of roofing nails on the ground, it ain't going to happen. Ethics are like that. So let's do a little visualization. Maybe, suppose, to see how this works, there's a piece of pie. There's a pie cut into many slices at a potluck. And we already had one slice, but we're kind of eyeing the second slice. But the problem is, there's a bunch of people talking who haven't yet been through the potluck. Anybody ever been in this kind of situation? So what do? We waver a bit, but we finally take the second slice. And this isn't stealing, we just took a piece of pie. But look at the subtle things that happen, because it has everything to do with what happens with ethics. For one thing, when we chose to take this slice, we're putting ourselves ahead of the other people, right? And there's a little sense of concretization of self, a little sense of separation. You can feel it, a little sense of, oh, me, that happens there and not other. And that's the opposite direction from moving toward nibbana, this concretizing of self. Therefore, we're moving in the backwards direction. Second, there's a little darkening of mind. You ever seen that? A little kind of subtle darkening of mind happening when we're choosing the pie as opposed to leaving it for the others. And it's the same thing. It's the opposite, you could say, of recognizing the clear light nature of mind, that darkening of mind from putting me and pie first. And then the third, second noble truth, cause of dukkha is grasping. And if we take the better thing for ourselves, there's a note of grasping there. And we set ourselves away from this path of awakening. So key here is intention. And this is really important. Intention is very key to the whole question of ethics. For instance, a person takes a sharp knife, cuts open the chest of another person, that person dies. Ooh, what's that? Well, if the knife-wielding person is in fact a murderer, doing that for some ill intent, then that's a very heinous action. They just killed someone. Very, very bad ethics. But what if that blade wielder is a member of Doctors Without Borders, operating on someone in Ukraine, trying to save their life? Cut them open, the person dies. Completely opposite. It's all about intention. So it's important in these ethical things to look at intention. So these aren't rules of morality. This is how the Dharma is working in ourselves, how the process of energy is working in ourselves. And in fact, actions that we're talking about, that's on 3 levels: body, speech, and mind. Body, speech, and mind. So this is also important when we're exploring making decisions about our ethical choices. On a level of body, say in terms of stealing, a key point is whether we steal something or not. Either we do or we don't. And the question here is, what do we do? And we can have an impulse and not do it. So that's good. We didn't do the action of body. What about speech? There's the precepts of not lying is about speech. But just in the other areas, talking about a non-virtuous act is a kind of conditioning. Look what goes on in social media. All kind of strange stuff people are saying, some of which doesn't have good intention. So are those, breaches of sila? You got to be careful, got to pay attention. Speech is really powerful. And then mind. What are we allowed to go on in our minds in terms of ethical questions? And this is subtle because, we all know in practice, all kind of odd stuff arises, right? Like, oh, really? If the Buddha was sitting next to me and seeing what's going on in my mind while meditating, it'd be kind of embarrassing, right? Stuff comes up. But when stuff comes up and we're mindful of it is a completely different question than if stuff comes up and we indulge in it or cultivate it. That's important. So body, speech, and mind in terms of ethics is really important. So let's just touch on the five precepts and explore those a little bit, and we'll have some chance to discuss. And the first of the 5 is refraining. And all these are always refraining from or training in. So it's not black and white. It's about how we're cultivating our minds and hearts. So that's always beautiful because there's not an error. There's always a journey in how we approach these. And every one of us, makes mistakes. I certainly do. But then what do we keep doing? How do we keep cultivating? So training and refraining from killing. And right there, we can see how this is framed or held in terms of intention. And it gets kind of complicated, how we navigate that. Like how many people, at times do some kind of organic gardening? Anybody? Okay, a lot of organic, it's Portland, a lot of organic gardening. But the fact is, when you're out there cultivating, there's all kind of worms getting cut in half, all kind of bugs whose lives suddenly got disrupted by your trowel, i.e., we killed them. We killed these bugs while we're growing this organic, wonderful food. That's a thing, that's a thing to be aware of. That's a key reason why Buddhist monks in their Vinaya, rules of Vinaya, they're not allowed to dig because they might kill beings in the ground. So how interesting. So that's killing, doing this wonderful thing, growing organic food, except we're killing something. And it's interesting in Tibetan world, the view is that it's better to kill one large sentient being and eat that than lots of small ones, which kind of makes sense in a way. You kill an ox and dry it and eat it for months and months versus killing a whole bunch of shrimp and eating those. So it's very interesting. And what if we're vegan, but we just grew broccoli and killed things? So we really have to pay attention to intention in all this. I mean, in a sense, there's no way we can get through life without inadvertently killing some beings. The Jains try it, and they sweep the ground in front of them so they won't step on any insects, wear masks so they won't inhale stuff, and that's beautiful. But it's hard to do. So we really have to watch intention here. Like, are we trying to kill? Are we holding it with respect? Our Native American brothers and sisters, they harvest salmon, but they do it with great respect and they thank them, and they're careful about using it all. So this whole arena of killing is so much about intention, and it's so much about an inner training, and it's so much about a kindness of offering life. What about the training in not stealing, to refrain from taking that which is not given? And this also gets pretty complicated in our complicated world. I think freely offered is always a great way to navigate that. I mean, even if there's a quarter on the sidewalk, what do? Just leave it there, maybe. Maybe the person's going to come back for the quarter. It wasn't offered, or a hat that we find in the sidewalk. What do we do? So to really feel, was it freely offered? Did someone offer it to us? Otherwise, don't take it. Kind of give it back. Is that stealing? And clearly, to take something that belongs to someone else, that's stealing. And for, most people in our culture, in our society, people are pretty clear on that, what's theft and what isn't. But it gets subtle, how do we navigate white privilege when we're on indigenous people's land that wasn't freely offered? I don't know about the history here. I know in Seattle, the Amish people, they didn't freely offer Seattle, or they thought they were going to get a reservation and they didn't. So it's still unresolved, so how do we navigate that? How do we hold it in our hearts? And what about, if we're white privileged and we're very well off because of the whole legacy? It's just to take these things in and really turn them into love and awareness. And yes, don't take the extra piece of pie. And of course, don't steal things, but kind of go deeper into our generosity around all of this. And we can't twist ourselves into not trying to rectify history, but we can act in generosity like Steve Armstrong did. It was amazing what he did in Myanmar, very quietly, without telling anybody hardly. Most people don't even know that he built all these schools and clinics with Dana that was offered. I guess he could have had a fancy car. I don't know. But he just gave it back. So generosity, overall, is a key part of the path, and that balances any taking we may have done inadvertently or otherwise. So there's always, in every one of these taking seal of breaches, there's an act of generosity, that because it's all about how we grow and the state of our mind and heart. That clear light, that darkness, move toward the light, away from the darkness. How we act in this arena is pivotal. Now, not lying, that's a big area. Sometimes translated as training to refrain from incorrect speech. And cultivating telling the truth is important in our journey because we're trying to see the nature of reality, that which is true. Therefore, our alignment of what we say and our inner seeking have to line up or it doesn't work. So if we're telling lies, I won't point any fingers, but any political persons, that don't tell the truth, how do they find the nature of reality? So it's an incremental thing, something to keep kind of caressing and articulating and refining in our lives, just being truthful, being even conscious of what we're omitting, what we're not saying. It's really subtle. Those of us who have been partners, with our partner, what do we say? What do we don't say? What's going to keep clearing the air and helping us go deeper? And this takes us right back to this question of selfing, not self, anatta. Because when we lie, just as when we kill, we're usually doing it to get something good for ourselves. That's why people do it. They kill others to get something good for them, especially stealing and lying. They get something to get something good for themselves versus the other. And that concretizes self right there in a nanosecond, which is the opposite direction from anatta, from that which takes us to awakening. So in these little nuances, because speech is so subtle, out of the 10 non-virtues, 3 of them are about speech. This is one area where we're very active. We constantly communicate and we can mess up in all kinds of subtle ways. So it's really worth looking at what we're doing in terms of lying, even on subtle levels. And, telling the truth is easy when it's easy. Telling the truth when it's hard, that's when it's a lift. That's when we really stretch and grow. So keep turning toward, that inner light. That's how we see. Keep checking. What's going to take us toward the inner light, towards awakening? What's going to take towards darkening and selfing? Check, 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 check. All the time, day by day, moment by moment in our speech. So these 3 of the 5 precepts, not stealing, not killing, and not lying, they're kind of straightforward because it's pretty clear that each one of them has some specific advantage over another. It's fairly black and white. But the remaining 2, training and refraining from sexual misconduct and training and refraining from alcohol and drugs, these are much more complicated in our world. Here's 4 little nuanced aspects of these that might suggest some of what's subtle about them. The core actions, sexuality and, taking in intoxicants, they're on a certain level personal activities. They don't inherently take from someone. Anyway, on a certain level, they're personal activities that aren't at the expense of others in the overt way, at least, that lying or stealing is. So that's one factor to take into account. And secondly, these same things done in a positive way may be part of our rich explorations of life, sexuality, and I'll talk about this in a second, but certain kinds of intoxicants, such as psychedelics, perhaps. And also our discernment about what is ethical and unethical. It's got all kinds of cultural norms and standards that make it hard to see how to go with these. And then lastly, these, to some degree, actions are perhaps inherently enjoyable, which raises a whole question about when is enjoyment just enjoyment and when is enjoyment craving. So all those are hard things to be clear on, which is why people make so many mistakes in these areas and get themselves in all kind of trouble. So in terms of the degree to which their personal actions, you could say imbibing substances, let's say psychedelics or something, it's a private matter. And sexual activity is an experience a person has, whether it's with someone or not. But there are blurry lines because the damage can come if one isn't conscious of how these activities are affecting others in whichever these two things they are. There's these like isolated persons, like there's some famous artists who were alcoholics and brilliant artists at the same time. And I guess you could sort of say, oh, well, they were just doing their thing. But I'm sure there was all kinds of mayhem with other people happening, right? We don't know. I don't know. But that's how it works. People who are abusing intoxicants become overly focused on their own experience, or undependable, they're harmful, all of that. And sexuality is even more complex. Now, it's interesting, in the teachings of the Buddha, he actually said very little about sexuality itself, a little bit about with whom it was consummated. In the Majjhima Nikaya, there's a very specific list for lay people saying one does not have intercourse with girls under the protection of their mother, father, brother or sister, relatives or clan, with women protected by law, married women, or those already engaged. So that's kind of some clear boundaries that we can understand. But that's kind of pretty much what he says about it. It's kind of like part of our own standards and our own culture. And the question is, if one is touching on engaging on anything, sexuality, we probably all do at some point, right? I mean, we're lay people, we're not monastic. So yes, to what degree is that harming someone else? To what degree is that at the expense of someone else? What's going on in the subtle times of it? Even within a committed couple, people can approach it in ways that are more selfing, not helpful. So the boundaries are interesting. You really have to go within to see what's helpful and what's not. And then a second area of nebulousness, just to fill in a little bit what I was saying, watching the clock here, is that there's some ways in which these can be some of our most powerful and beautiful human experiences. I mean, intoxicants, what about Native American peyote ceremonies or psychedelics? Is that good or bad? How do you hold that? How do we think about that? It's the intention, right? If it's a sacred thing, maybe it's okay. Maybe we wouldn't do it in Theravada tradition, but maybe in those traditions it's okay. Can't be black and white. It comes back to intention. Is it about awakening? Is it about benefiting all beings? Or is it about selfishness and separating? Have to discern through that. And then what about sexuality? There might be some kind of arrangement. What about polyandry arrangements? Multiple interlocking couples. For some people in our culture, that's going to seem really wrong. For other people within that world of polyandry, it seems very wholesome and positive. So there's no rigid rules. We have to look within and feel out what is actually helping other beings, what is actually concretizing self. And, sexuality is very intense. Can be difficult to be mindful in the middle of it, right? Maybe, I don't know. Something to pay attention to. How do we hold it? How are we? Are we present? And then, as we navigate 21st century cultural attitudes about these things, how do we understand what the boundaries are? I mean, among North American practitioners of the Dharma, there's a lot of support for gay people. Great, that's great. In many parts of Africa, 31 nations, I looked it up, it's illegal to be gay. Isn't that amazing? So there's some huge cultural differences within this world, this human sphere of what's right and what's wrong there. Have to look in our heart, have to look in the energy of it to really see what's going to be working, because there aren't any hard and fast rules. The suttas themselves don't mention, by the way, homosexuality pretty much anywhere. So almost the one place is in the Vinaya about monastic behavior. And it says a monk who engages in sexual intercourse, whether with a woman, a man, or an animal, is no longer a monk. So covers the whole enchilada. Is that the word? And then, the fourth area is just the whole question of how do we relate to that which is enjoyable? How do we navigate that on the path without clinging? Because, in the 12 links of dependent origination, there's contact, there's pleasant, unpleasant, and neutral. And then there's clinging if we stick. And then we're stuck. So, Dalai Lama, give him ice cream, he'll be happy with the ice cream, but he's not going to cling to ice cream. So maybe we have to look at that in our journey about all these things that we could get attached to, that we could have sexual boundaries of ethics around. So in terms of these last two, then, subtler, because there's nothing inherently wrong, obviously, in sexuality. There is something inherently wrong in stealing, arguably, or killing. But nothing inherently wrong in sexuality, nothing inherently wrong in substances that change the mind if they're not clouding the mind, if they're part of a spiritual direction. I think we could probably argue that most kinds of substances don't fit with meditation, but it's not black and white. But it really has to do with what it does to our heart mind, how it affects others. If it's taking away from someone, hurting someone else, then unethical. I think I'll leave it at that.